You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your five-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. It's just the three of us this week, Geoff, Mike, and Kate, catching you on the flip side of E-Day. We need some time to regroup. How are you doing, gentlemen?
Maybe better than I deserve to.
I need sleep. After hanging out with you guys on Saturday night.
Ooh.
Oh boy, geez.
Yeah, that was the latest night I've had in a while.
I know. Big party time.
Big party time. Big slow digest time.
We should get paid overtime by Global. I think.
Yeah.
Well, it was a random pub selection for those who are listening, but it turned out to be a political gathering spot of a surprising number of people.
What was the name of that pub? The
Butcher and the Bullock.
Butcher and the Bullock, and it was all decorated for Halloween.
I think
super surreal.
I think Geoff and Kate were the first people to order wine there in quite some time.
Yeah. Oh, we do have wine.
They found a bag of it in the fridge somewhere.
And it paired nicely with the pizza I jammed in my face like a starving woman.
Well, the video screens were showing a Wesley Snipe kind of snuff flick set in ghoulish places where people were eating entrails and so on some kind of a loop. And I was a bit down at the outcome, but that was even darker than I wanted to be.
Totally. If you saw me go glassy-eyed a couple times over my wine, it was because something really gruesome was playing on the screen, like over Mike's shoulder. And I just kind of the whole night, I feel like the whole vibe was just like, what the heck just happened? What is this? What's next? And so that's what we're going to do with the show today, guests. We're going to walk you through a bit of what we think happened, a little bit of why, a little bit of what's next in an extended strategy suite. And then, of course, we're all keen to go back to the mini bar, the good old mini bar. We'll dust it off, resurrect it, and raise our glasses or take shots as is appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's start us out. I think let's start, Mike, with a bit of the postmortem on like what happened. And I want to start with turnout because the overall number ended up still being quite high despite that atmospheric river, just the number, but maybe not the percentage of voters, more an average showing, I guess.
It's a record number.
Raw number.
We did break raw number. We did break the 2 million mark, but not by much so far. There's still a few more votes to come in. So maybe it's going to be about just under 2.1 at the end of the day, roughly. I think those are the numbers. The advanced turnout was a deep fake,
exactly.
1.1 million. I was thinking like, oh boy, this is going to be. I mean, it was a fake out in two respects. One is like, we thought all this turnout's going to be change election, which is kind of true.
Kind of right.
But general election day did not follow through with the heavy turnout. So I think a lot of people just want to get over with.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't maybe not as much.
I found this interesting. I'd be interested in the reaction of both of you to this little thing I found from Mario Conseco, who did an exit poll. And he reports that 53% of British Columbians told him they made up their minds on which party or candidate to vote for prior to the start of the campaign, meaning that the campaign didn't mean very much to at least half of the voters. I don't know, Mike, do you think that's normal? Or was there, everything stayed kind of locked in a static battle for most of the campaign. Does this explain it?
Well, I think most people don't change their mind during a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
One question pollsters usually ask is, how certain is it that you're going to vote for the party that you've just said you were supporting? And Conservatives probably had the highest level of certitude, but the NDP weren't that far behind it. The Greens were the least. And targetable by the NDP to flip them over because they weren't as committed to being Green voters. And I think we saw that happen.
So can we talk about the Greens too for a second? Because I wanted to put in context the number of the overall vote they got, which was 9%. Well, it was a little bit low. Oh, it's about 8. Okay.
Yeah.
So my point is, like, do we need to put that in context of the fact that they had only the 63 candidates? Like
69.
69, sorry, candidates.
If you extrapolated it, it might be closer to 10%, but it's still, they had 16, 17% last two elections. So this is a big diminishment of support for them.
Yeah.
Now they held their seats. They held 2 seats. So at the end of the day, that's what matters. But outside the island, they did poorly. I think around the 5% on the mainland. Yeah, on the island, they were, I don't know. Actually, I do know. I think it was more towards 18% on the island. Yes, 18%, but that's down 9% from last election on the island. So I think they got polarized.
Mhm.
Well, partly they didn't run enough candidates, but I also think they got picked off by the NDP.
Mm.
But the NDP apparently circulated a list of ridings that might have been NDP had the Greens not been running, which is always a great post-election what if thing. But we talked yesterday a bit in a different locale about the fact that both those ridings, certainly the Sea to Sky riding, in my view, was not available to the NDP, and it went Green.
Yeah.
And I think Saanich North the Islands has been a very tough one for the NDP to win in recent years. So the Greens did get support from uh, or the conservatives lost to the Greens where it was possible for that to happen.
Well, the NDP shouldn't be complaining too much because they won Coquitlam Burke Mountain by a whisper,
Mm-hmm.
and there was no Green.
No.
So
Is anyone saying anything, like anybody who was on the ground saying anything about the impact of the atmospheric river, particularly in Coquitlam and Surrey, like where the roads were impassable at junctures? Like, have you guys heard anything, people saying that they feel like it had a really big impact, or are people kind of just feeling like it was, sorry for the pun here, but a wash?
there was a lot of rain in Coquitlam and Burke Mountain being on the slope. There might have been an impact there, and that was a close one. That was a 1% difference in vote. North Shore, though, I don't think any ridings were close on the North Shore, so I don't think any outcomes were impacted there.
Well, and the rain falls on everybody too. It's very hard to say, well, that just deterred certain voters. I don't know.
We go party by party now and just do, because I think there's two stories to tell for all three of the big parties in this election about what happened. And I want to go kind of party by party to talk about this. So we'll start with the Greens because we were just talking about them, but there's a little bit of like, how do you interpret this result? There's a negative and a more positive version of events. And I think one that's more likely to be told within the party and another one without. So, I'll start with the Greens, Geoff, and just say like, right, I think you can say inside the party a victory because they're likely to be the deciders or could be the deciders. And then the sort of more negative take would be, yeah, but we like lost in proportion of the vote, and Sonia lost her seat in Victoria Beacon Hill, maybe that campaign was resources put in the wrong place, partly because of that shift and the outcome.
Well, I think they put their resources in Beacon Hill because they really believed they could win. And I think New Democrats are very concerned that that was the case. It turned out to be completely wrong. But I can't perceive a strategy for the Greens. And I think they're lucky it turned out the way it did because they didn't have sweeping victories in either of the places that they won. And, they've not had the resources ever to kind of start to challenge for government, which is the point of a political party. I think that they really hit a wall in the by-election, and I guess it was in 2018, I forget the year, but there was a by-election in Nanaimo won by Sheila Malcolmson, and that really demoralized the Green. Andrew Weaver was still the leader of the Greens. They thought they could add that seat and keep going, and certainly the candidate they had there had NDP roots. He was also a strong environmentalist, and he was a good shot for them, and he didn't do it. So I think they've been looking to play this honest conscience role, which is a self-appointed role they have, and maybe they'll get to do it. But it's a big challenge, and this is not a knock on the two new MLAs, but they have a lot of work cut out for them. And, I think it means that we really won't see how the government will settle for a number of months, because the Greens will have to sort themselves out as well as decide what positions they want to take with regard to whatever overtures they're getting from the other parties.
Can we contrast to who will be potentially the negotiating team this round compared to 2017? Because I'm looking at it and thinking this is a very different cast of characters compared to 2017. I think like Sonia Furstenau certainly will be back at the table, but Adam Olsen wasn't involved last time, I understand, and probably certainly will be this time.
He wasn't in the room.
He wasn't in the room.
He was across the hall.
Right?
Yeah.
Which was a curious decision, frankly. But anyways, that's yesterday. Well, I think these two MLAs elect, for the Greens are serious, sophisticated representatives.
Lawyer and an engineer.
Jeremy
Yeah.
V from West
Yeah.
Van Sea to Sky. I'm not going to try and pronounce his name again.
Valeriot.
Valeriot.
You're gonna have to
Like
keep
a-
practicing. We're
like a
gonna.
chariot.
He's not
See,
going away.
Valeriot.
There you go. Yeah.
Valeriot
Yeah,
the
like
chariot.
chariot. Yeah.
So we all know he almost won last time. He spent 4 years running again. And I always, I kind of like it when candidates miss and work their tails off for 4 years and win, like Doug Klobuchar
Yeah,
from
it's
Columbia River
true.
Revelstoke
Yeah.
was the same way. And so he's done that. So he's been tuned into provincial politics for 4 years. It's not like he showed up and got elected. And Rob Botterill is a lawyer, former public servant, had to go through a nomination race that got a little nasty in Saanich North and the Islands. And I think my assumption going into the campaign was that Adam Olsen was carrying the Greens on his coattails in that riding. And I turned one of many things I was wrong about. Botterill put together a pretty convincing win.
Yeah.
So I think both these guys are coming with a lot of sophistication to the conversation that's about to happen here.
Yes, in the days following a very close election, whether your team won or not, I think all of us politicos could use a moment of zen. So, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and let's imagine ourselves taking a long, slow walk around Vancouver's Stanley Park. We can stroll along the seawall, staring up at the giant cedars, and then out at the ocean. And here's the thing. At the pace of a post-election politico and campaign fatigue recovery, this is a long walk. Because Stanley Park is huge. And let me use Stanley Park as a unit of measurement us BCers can all feel good about. Because hometown team TELUS recently celebrated planting over 12 million trees, achieving an incredible milestone that is equivalent to planting 20,000 acres of forest, which is the equivalent of 20 Stanley Parks. Try and picture it. That's a lot of trees. And that's not all. TELUS is partnering with leading restoration companies like Veritree, which uses blockchain technology to verify tree planting projects, and Flash Forest, which employs drone and AI technology for rapid reforestation, leveraging TELUS's world-leading networks to support innovative forest and ocean restoration efforts. It's work we can all feel good about, and TELUS showing up once again as BC's hometown team.
Well, I think I'd been saying they're relative newcomers, but I have to correct myself because Valeriot actually was a city councillor. Like Valeriot's been around politics in a pretty deep way, and then they do have the support of Sonia and Adam. So I know you got to figure they're putting their heads together to figure out what's the right way to play whatever comes.
I think Sonia's going to be a lot less relevant as every day
No,
passes.
yeah.
And during the campaign, I was down on Sonia around the time of the debate, thinking that she didn't have a message and what exactly were the Greens doing anyways? And then I felt after the debate she was actually on a roll, and I was wrong about that. Turned out they were not on a roll, and I thought she was going to win Beacon Hill, and she didn't win Beacon Hill by 3,000 votes. She didn't.
By 3,000, yeah.
So it's just the eye test, wasn't there for me on the Greens this campaign, but they got 2 seats. And winning West Van Sea to Sky, I didn't think they were going to win West Van Sea to Sky either. So they, on the ground where they're strong, they pulled it through. But the air support didn't seem to lift everybody else up.
Can we talk briefly now, or should we later? But at some point, we've got to say how this is different politically. And we've been in so many of these conversations now. I can't remember if I've said this before, but it occurred to me after a few conversations yesterday that, and I think Mike has made the same point in different places, that the NDP currently holding the slight edge does not really need a deal with the Green Party the way it did in 2017, because there isn't a suitable competitive offer from the Conservatives.
Yeah.
And so that's an important point.
We don't think there will be. We don't think there will be.
No, but on the face of it, it's difficult. And I would argue that it's not easy with the NDP either, given the fact that they have been at odds over more issues than they were in 2017, including not just natural gas policy, but safer supply and decriminalization and involuntary care and so on. So there's quite a straightforward path for David Eby to say, I want to work with you guys. We're part of the progressive majority that you talked about on Saturday night, but we need to think longer and harder about a deal and stabilize things and see where we go from here. And so the Greens may be thinking that they should build up a wish list for some kind of a CASA agreement, but it might not be the best thing from the NDP standpoint. And I'm not sure where they're going to land on that. The other question, though, is until they know exactly how many people are elected for each party, and again, I think we think that it'll probably stay the same, but it may not. They have to find a speaker. And if the NDP has to go to its own ranks for a speaker, that person is able to cast tie-breaking votes, certainly on procedural and other matters. There's a whole protocol around it. It's not totally settled law because it's not law. It's convention and parliamentary practice. But the NDP could get a speaker and just dare the Greens to take down the House.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a more likely scenario in the near term than a formal agreement.
Okay, I do want to pivot to the NDP, but you're getting to the tail end of it, Geoff. I think let's step back because I do want to talk about the NDP in the context of like how do they interpret this result? And I think I was reflecting because Jazz Johal on election night asked me like what does this mean for David Eby? Is it going to be a threat to his leadership? And I think this is what kind of got me thinking about how different these things can feel from inside the party versus outside it. Because I think Jazz is coming from a standpoint of like standing outside it, you could say, this is not a great result for the NDP. David Eby was clearly humbled on election night. And you probably could point
Although he didn't say he was humbled. Vaughn Palmer's column today.
Vibes humbled.
Vaughn said that Eby didn't use the H word.
Okay, fine. I don't know if you have to use the H word to be humbled, but okay. There was some humility present. And okay. I'm gonna differ there and say there was that in the way he spoke and the way he spoke, put an olive branch out to the Greens and the way he spoke to the broader electorate. So there was something there, and the man was clearly tired. And you could also, I think, to just add one more point, you could say some of the stuff that the NDP seemed to trip on comes back to a bit of David Eby's leadership style and a little bit of his like take no prisoners, get shit done energy. Inside the party, I could see another discussion though, which is, and I'll say like on Monday, there was an election in New Brunswick, same thing, overwhelming change election. And the Conservatives and Blaine Higgs got trounced by the Liberals, like reduced to 15 seats, less than half of what the Liberals have, right? And Saskatchewan, just to kind of further the point, the appetite for change is so huge. Saskatchewan now is on the precipice of electing their first non-conservative government in like 20 years. I'm going to say most of my adult life, they've been conservative. So just to say, you could kind of say, okay, hold on a second. There's a context here that is voters are angry and want change. And maybe this result where potentially they can bump to the other side of a different voter mood was maybe about as good as it gets. So I'll stay with you, Geoff, just to kind of ask this, like, do you agree with that assessment maybe that how people view this election might differ a little within the NDP compared to outside it, how people view this result? Sorry.
Well, no, I think in the broader social democratic movement in the province, there'll be grave disappointment about this. And I think that's natural. And I think that David Eby's comments were on the mark. I thought on Saturday night, he touched the key areas. And as you say, he was obviously exhausted. One thing that he said straight out, which I wrote about on my blog this morning, it hasn't been published yet, but he's directly agreed with John Rustad on issues of crime and public safety and made a point of saying, notwithstanding other disagreements, he agrees on that point. And in my own view, that issue, which Eby started to respond to early on by reversing direction on decriminalization and some other steps he took, has been one of the critical thematic debates or ballot questions this time. So we had Rustad on the one hand saying, in very exaggerated rhetoric that BC's a hellscape. People are jammed up in the exits trying to get out. Life is in free fall for a lot of people. Whatever you think of the rhetoric, there was clearly a broad current moving for change because they were frustrated with lack of progress in certain key areas. And I think that the NDP campaign believed in its heart and had lots of stats to prove it, that progress was being made in those areas, but it wasn't being felt on the ground by people. And so, I think in both sides, but certainly in the NDP camp, and it makes sense, there will be examining how close this election was and asking what could have been done to win it, because it was clearly winnable. Another couple of seats, and we would be having a very, very different discussion. And so that'll be a searching conversation, I think, and it has to happen while EB's team gets on its feet, assuming it's able to form government somehow, and then execute some changes that would demonstrate that his comments on Saturday night were going to be followed up by action.
Do you agree with that, Mike? That it's the kind of street crime safety angle potentially that they needed to shore up?
Well, I'm struck by the regional polarization of the results. And you draw a line down the Fraser River, and everything south of the Fraser River, well, not everything, but 19 out of 24 so far have gone Conservative, maybe 20 of Surrey City Centre switches. And north of the Fraser River, 24 out of 28 go NDP. So what does that tell us? Well, the NDP ran up the margin in the city of Vancouver, and they actually held their vote in Surrey, but the Conservatives eclipsed them. Eclipsed by 3 or 4 points. So there's something going on in regional populations that are moving. Surrey's moving further away from Vancouver. The interior is moving further away from the Lower Mainland, it seems, in some respects, or parts of the Lower Mainland. And so what's underneath that? I'd be concerned. I think I said on election night, I'd be concerned if I were the NDP that they're losing some of these seats that should be profile their voters, like in North Surrey. That's a bit surprising. Now, if I'm the Conservatives looking ahead at this map, I'm thinking like, okay, we almost won here, but why are we not doing very well north of the Fraser River?
Right.
Why are we only picking up 3 seats? They won Maple Ridge East, they won West Van Capilano, and they won Colchana, and which Colchana and Capilano will be almost impossible to lose. But they didn't win in the suburbs north of the Fraser. So it's like, the NDP got to do better south of the Fraser. The Conservatives have to do better north of the Fraser. And that's going to be the battleground next time.
Now, on the Surrey issue, a friend of mine cautioned me on the weekend, which is not that long ago, but that it would be wrong to treat the Surrey issue as a sort of an ethnic community voting shift by itself. Certainly, those are factors there. But he was saying, don't forget the hospital, which has been a perennial issue. We could talk forever about why it's not completed now. Another thing that's not finished, which is a bugbear for a lot of people south of the Fraser, is the Massey Tunnel, Massey Bridge, Massey Tunnel. They're still sorting out which police force they have, and I think a deeper dive will find all of those issues at play. So you see a guy like Gary Begg, whose riding is less diverse ethnically than some others. He still is, barely clinging to his seat. And I was very struck by the defeat of Baltej Dillon, because I thought he was perhaps the most prestigious candidate that the EB team recruited. Retired senior Mountie who had a history of working on civil rights issues for the right to wear turban, that kind of stuff. So yeah, a lot more to find out about Surrey, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I've been listening to a lot of interviews with different candidates from within Surrey and people who were at the doors. And there's a pretty consistent chorus that the community safety, street crime came up a lot. But what I've heard, I think consistently, is not in the context of the police force and the switch. There's something else. So it's interesting because it makes the question for me is this something where the policy piece didn't play into it? It's just people reacting to the fact that they're seeing more of it, on their local street corner, and just bothered and annoyed. And it was just always going to go to the change column because they're just not happy with what they're seeing. I shouldn't say annoyed. I should say maybe with more compassion than that, bothered by it.
Well, the NDP candidate Newton, who won on election night, one of the 2 confirmed so far. I can't remember her name, Geoff. But
Amna Shaw, I think, yeah.
Yeah. She was pretty blunt about how people in Surrey viewed the NDP government. I'm paraphrasing here, but I think she said, people want to see results. And I thought that, moment of candor was quite insightful in terms of how a candidate feels about their own party's record. And And that's obviously what she was hearing at the door. You know, like Surrey, through successive governments, Surrey hasn't felt like it's kept pace with growth, and governments have not been delivering for Surrey. And I think that expressed itself.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to talk to you today about the important role we all play in reducing the risk of damage to utility infrastructure. Public safety is the number one priority of our sponsor, FortisBC, and raising awareness of the importance of safe excavation is one of the ways they keep their customers and infrastructure safe. That means clicking or calling BC One Call before digging or any other ground disturbance, even something as simple as planting shrubs, gardening, or building a fence. BC One Call is a free service that provides location details of utility lines in the area an individual is looking to work in, ultimately reducing the risk of accidental damage. Over the past number of years, FortisBC has observed an overall downward trend in the number of third-party damages to its gas lines, demonstrating the effectiveness of ongoing efforts to raise awareness and promote safe digging practices. Residents and contractors can contact BC One Call by visiting their website, www.bc1c.ca, or calling 1-800-474-6886. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
All right, let's move on to the conservatives then, and I'll start with the same frame. Like I think the headline, there has to be no question. The headline has to be this is historic, and broadly a win for them. But I do wonder if there's another critique, and I feel like we're hearing it more from the corners who are close to the Conservatives, but maybe closer to BC United, a bit of like, and the fact that you didn't form government is very much your own doing, and kind of pointing at John Rustad, really, who is the person at the end of the day who made the calls on where the candidates won. So there's a little bit of both this sort of big reason for celebration, and I think for them broadly a feeling that it was a historic victory, Mike. But I also wonder if within particularly as they're going to head into what's probably going to be a pretty bumpy ride in opposition. Is there going to be a little bit of dissent internally? Is anyone going to hold that against John Rustad, that it seems like they may have missed their best shot and they may have missed it on the handful of candidates? Can I just point one out? Because I was looking through them over the weekend, and thinking in particular, it's Kelowna Centre, Michael Humer. And I know they narrowly took that riding, but like that was a thoracic surgeon who was a great candidate, who, from what I understand, was like literally sitting at the phone waiting for them to call. And I'll use a double entendre here, but like would have inoculated them against a lot of the critique around vaccines and everything else. Like there's some candidates you kind of go like, I still don't understand why you didn't grab that person, and it would have pushed you across the finish line.
Rustad answered this yesterday on an interview I saw, which is like, I think Richard Zussman put it to him. He said, what about Vernon and Steveston and Langara?
Yeah.
He says, well, coulda, shoulda, but I'm a loyal guy and I'm loyal to my team. And that was his answer. And that's fine. But I would say in politics, ideally, province before party before the person.
Yeah.
And you can't be slavishly loyal to someone who is there for you if it means it's going to hurt the party and it's going to hurt what you're trying to do for the province. So I think they screwed up on that. Now, he also took the ball at the 1 yard line, took it 99 yards down the field, and
Totally
almost scored a touchdown. And it may well yet, depending on the recounts. Now, unlikely, but I think we're in this interregnum period where we can't really pass judgment on Rustad, because if he ends up at 46 instead of 45,
it'll change everything.
The likelihood of having an election sooner than later is much higher.
Yeah.
But if he stays at 45 and NDP plus Green, they decide to cooperate, and that's 48, then yeah, they lost. And no matter all the huffing and puffing, they're probably going to be sitting in opposition for 4 years, or whenever the NDP choose to.
Yeah.
At the time of the NDP's choosing.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, I think it's like, okay, now what do we do?
Okay, what do they do? Finish the thought. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to roll back the tape a bit, because your loyalty to the party is an interesting question, because, in my view, the major story of the campaign, especially in this year, in 2024, was the complete collapse of Kevin Falcon's plan to achieve what Rustad did. In other words, Kevin Falcon knew he had to move to the right. He wanted to identify more with that conservative vote. He saw that. He decided that having liberal in your name was a bad idea when Pierre Trudeau was despised by a large part of
Justin.
your base. Justin, right? Yeah, whichever one it is.
Whichever Trudeau.
But same thing. Anyway, there was the same visceral hatred for his dad, so it's come back again for the second generation. But um, those voters fled Falcon's solution like people jumping out of a burning building, and we had that conversation on the podcast a couple of times. Kevin Falcon wound up trying to chase them down the road, shouting after them, "No, actually, I'm as angry as you were about this," or "I agree with this other random comment about that." And as Rustad began to pick up the reins, Falcon was reacting on a weekly basis, trying to match, the firing of Bonnie Henry or whatever it was that day. And the collapse of that option, to me, is a fascinating thing, because I don't think the new animal is the so-called Free Enterprise Coalition that Mike was so involved in and Jastrow Hall so familiar with. And it may be a flash in the pan, but I don't think so. I think it'll settle down into something else, and I'm not quite sure what that is. Rustad would be more loyal to people who came through the door to shake his hand when he had just been kicked out of the BC United Caucus than he would be maybe to people phoning him from whoever to say, "Hey, we really need you to do a big favor for so-and-so." I heard that about, I have no idea if it's true, but it's an interesting gossip about Trevor Halford being extremely reluctant to support any move to join the Conservatives, and that Falcon and Diane Watts, who was campaign co-chair, had to make a significant submission to the Rustad team to accept Halford in that riding, which he already held. Even Eleanor Sturko, who was a huge catch and a devastating for Rustad and a devastating blow to Falcon, had to go to run in a different riding. She wasn't allowed to remain in her own incumbent seat. So he was loyal to this new group of people. And then during the campaign, this is another big thing, was that when the NDP and my friends were working so hard to amplify 3 or 4-year-old tweets, he just said at some point, "I'm not going to dump anybody. You can shout all you want." It turned out to be correct. It's like kind of saying to somebody, a new friend.
Dumped a couple, but mostly.
Yeah, but at some point he drew a line and just said, "No, I'm not doing it." And so he's got a Brent Chapman problem now, but maybe that's not that big a deal. Chapman got elected with, 58% of the vote or something? So I think this bears a little more
yes and no, though,
consideration.
Geoff. Yeah, yes. And I think, though, like, if you want to look at the impact of Brent Chapman's tweets, sorry, I'm not saying he cheated, his tweets, the implication is less about that riding and more about other ridings. And I think we did see evidence that there was some payback in there. I just think it wasn't where people expected, because I think a lot of us, I would include myself in this, like, let's do the mea culpas. I was sort of looking at what's the impact locally for Brent Chapman, and then what's the impact in particularly like communities with a big Muslim vote. And that turned out to be wrong, right? Like, and I think that is the thing that ultimately made the conservative wave crest, but it made it crest in places like North Vancouver and on the island. It didn't make it crest in the places I think some of our eyes were trained.
Interesting to just touch briefly on the Muslim vote, which is the first election that I've been involved in where there was any discussion of the Muslim vote. And David Eby went to, there was the crisis over Gaza and Selena Robinson, where senior leaders of the Muslim community told David Eby, "You will not be allowed to come into many of our religious institutions during a campaign if you don't resolve this in a way that we're comfortable with." Presumably they were comfortable with what happened. So, but Eby was not welcomed with particularly open arms, at least in the little clip I saw from CBC. I think it was Katie DeRosa, where he was challenged by a representative of one of the mosques to stop referring to terrorists in terms of Palestinian militants. I guess that's what, I didn't see the whole context, but then David Eby, I thought, correctly and courageously said, I cannot agree with your characterization. We're going to disagree. The events of October 7th were horrifying. But it was the first time I've seen that kind of profile for the Muslim community. I welcome that, but I don't think it's really that well understood what its political ramifications are. And there are other issues like that in Surrey, which I think will bubble up and turn out to be part of the stuff not getting done. That it's going to be a challenge for David Eby and their team, because part of pledge they were making is we are getting things done and we need to finish the job.
I'm Hamas, and this is Simon, and we live in Surrey. We started hosting on Airbnb because we thought we had the spare room, and why not share it with people? When our guests come in, first thing usually they ask is, I'm really hungry, it's been a really long flight, can you recommend a place? Usually Simon is really good with that. He knows all the good spaces. Because we got a lot of good reviews and people commented on the overall look of the space, I was like, okay, maybe I can do this for a living. It actually gave me the courage to start school in interior design. It made such an impact on us financially, and I don't know, I think we're happier because we started Airbnb for sure.
Learn more at airbnb.com/host.
Mike, do you want to talk at all about just the independents quickly? Because I know, I think most of us would be surprised. They were an important factor, but no one punched above, was it 30%?
There's lots of hype that they could win. And, like in the Peace River region, the provincial Conservatives would win 30% of the vote up there, like in recent elections, with basically hardly a leader in place. So I'm not surprised that they won in both those Peace River seats over 70% of the vote, and Bernier and Davies were about 24%. So it's hard to fight that, like as an independent to overcome something your voters actually want, which is they wanted the Conservatives. So why would they go independent? Tom Shapika wins the prize for the highest independent vote in Kootenay Rockies. He got 30% of the votes. That's a testament to his personal support and brand, but still he wasn't really that close at the end of the day. So they may feel they did the right thing because they were cast out, during the Falcon Rustad deal without so much as a phone call. And so they stood up for themselves and did that. But there wasn't an impact on a number of ridings where the Conservatives won handily anyways, but for some of those BC United candidates who were not MLAs, they did make an impact in Vernon, in Steveston, almost in Kelowna Centre. And that was a damaging to the Conservatives' part. Adam Walker, I thought, in that riding, Ladysmith Oceanside, I thought Adam Walker was going to seal the deal for the Conservatives because there was a Green, part of the riding voted BC Liberal in the past. Adam Walker was in the race, and he got 16%, and the NDP won, not by a huge amount, but they won by 5%. So, so overall, the independents in two ridings may have turned the election, but it wasn't overall as big an impact, I think, as some people thought that they would have on the election.
Okay, can we stay in the place of Mike McDonald digests and talk about, you've run the numbers on the number of women elected in the legislature, is that right?
Yeah, it's historic. The majority of the MLAs elected in the legislature will be women, and 67% of the NDP caucus, as of this moment in time, be higher if they lose Wanda Fuka, are women, and that's a significant dynamic, and especially forming a cabinet. Now the pendulum has swung the other way completely. What does that mean for the NDP as they approach these gender issues in the future? Is the quota done its job now? Can everyone relax on that, or
at least
what?
On gender? Because I think the danger is with gender too, is it can get in the way of racial diversity initiatives, and it's actually, there's research to support that if you stay focused on that, it can come at the cost of other types of diversity. So it's a good one to flag.
It mirrors the NDP's have more support with women, and it reverses the opposite. They struggled with men relative to the Conservatives, and there's always typically a gender split between the left and the right in elections. It's not that surprising, but I think they'll probably want to be thinking
40% for the Conservatives this time, which actually has got to be one of the higher Conservative caucuses, like highest proportion in the country that I can think of. Like, I have spent a lot of time looking at gender balance in caucuses, and the Conservative ones tend to be, I'd say, under 25% female. Yeah,
no, it's pretty solid. compared to the number of candidates they had was much lower than that as percentage. So clearly they had women in places where they could win. And
Yeah.
and you had some women scrape out some big wins, like Sharon Hartwell in Bulkley Valley's Stikine knocked off Nathan Cullen.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of new personalities coming to the legislature, not just conservatives. There's a lot of new NDPers too, and it's a lot more. There's a different gender mix on it. There'll be different diversity element to it because conservatives have all sorts of candidates from different cultures, as do the NDP. So it will be an interesting little ecosystem there.
All right. One more quick point, actually, and I'm gonna do a wardrobe change for this one, which is I did have coffee this morning with Richard Zussman. He brought me my fantastic
Oh,
BC
wow.
United
Wow.
hat.
Bring in props. That's my thing. You
Thank
stole
you.
it.
Yeah, no, yeah, no, I'm learned from the best. But I wanted to ask you, can we take another minute and just talk about what's going to happen
Richard
with
promised
BC?
me a map, and he hasn't given me my
I think he's
map
coming
yet.
for you today, actually. He was
Is he?
gonna, yeah. Are you in the office? Because I think he was gonna, try and stop by. He's floating around grabbing some
Of course, I'm in the
cortados.
office. Do you see Snickers here? Snickers is not here. I'm in the
Oh,
office.
obviously. Sorry. Yes. This is your office tableau. Forgive me. I should know at this point. Richard's around. He's going to come find you and drop that off. Related to this fantastic hat that I'm so grateful for. Thank you, Richard. What's next for BC United? And I know there's definitely going to be some rumblings about, what was lost without them in this election.
I think there's a lot of anger there among people who felt deprived of their choice. On one hand, I think Kevin Falcon is almost vindicated in terms of he felt that was the pathway to help stop the NDP. And my God, it's couldn't be any closer.
Yeah.
And arguably, if a few balls had bounced the other direction, they would have won a majority at this point. Now, still, the manner in which they did it has created a lot of upset. And certainly, as we saw in the campaign, a lot of former BC Liberals who were more of the moderate Liberal end of the party endorsed the NDP and were out campaigning for the NDP and voting for the NDP. So now, will we see a resurgence of the BC Liberal Party? Because I think we will never see BC United on a ballot ever.
Mm-hmm.
But if Liberal types, moderates, decide they want to keep that party going, Falcon will go. They have to deal with the debts.
Mm-hmm.
But if they decide that there's enough people that want to get off the couch and put forward an option that fits between the NDP and the Conservatives, then there may well could be, and I would assume it'd probably be a BC Liberal Party brand back on the ballot next time. And what would that mean? Oh, I wouldn't say automatically it's a bad thing for the Conservatives. It may be that by that point people are so fried with the NDP that NDPers may feel the BC Liberal option under a new reinvention is a safe place for them to go. But that's a lot of what ifs.
Yeah. Interesting ones. Anything to add, Mike, on what you think is going to happen there?
Me?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Geoff. Yeah, sorry.
Well, parties become useless, but don't necessarily go away. And I think the Conservatives are a case in point. It took them, a generation or two to come back.
Fair. Yeah.
So you never know, but I agree with Mike. I don't think you're going to see them in the short term. And it's very difficult when you're facing a debt like that to attract anybody in. Like, who needs that problem when you need every penny and it's so much hard work anyway to come and take over a battered franchise like that and assume that all of the obligations and disappointments that went with it, it's easier to start fresh in many respects. But who knows?
I wouldn't underestimate how people see that project. There is a history of the Liberal brand when they were outside of power, when the Socreds were in. It hung on for decades. And there were always a few seats there for them on the west side of Vancouver, the North Shore, Oak Bay, University District type ridings. So I actually believe that if a strong independent had run in Colchena this election, they could well have won that one. That's one place where an independent Liberal could have won. So it's a project, though. It's it's a daunting project, but I wouldn't rule it out.
All right. Gentlemen, I think now this is the part where we go and pull the white claws off the furniture and throw open the curtains and reopen the strategy suite.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
And it's so good to be back.
Walking down the hall of the strategy suite.
Yeah, I went over to this is the room I picture with the mahogany leather wingback chairs and a fantastic library. Okay, this is where we're going to talk about what's next. And get into a bit of prognostication, but I think there's a lot to think about what could happen next. And Mike, I want to talk to you a bit about arithmetic versus chemistry.
Arithmetic and chemistry.
Oh, arithmetic and chemistry.
In the 2017 period, the Troubles, we were searching from BC local perspective for pathways. And I had a conversation with, I'll just mention him. I don't think he'll mind. Bob Ray, who'll be in Vancouver next week at the Websters, highlighting the Webster Awards. And he had been through a minority situation in Ontario in 1985, where he supported the David Peterson's Liberal government. And his phrase to me was arithmetic and chemistry. Do the numbers work? But is there chemistry between the parties that have to do the deal? And I felt in 2017 we had the arithmetic, but we lacked chemistry with the Greens. And chemistry won out over arithmetic, I would argue. So this time, I would argue that the chemistry is even weaker between the Greens and the Conservatives. But depending on Juan de Fuca, we'll see where the arithmetic lands in terms of how things are going to shake out. As we talked about a few minutes ago, if the Conservatives get to 46, even if Greens plus NDP equals 47, it's going to be a really hard road to make that work. But if it's Greens plus NDP 48, totally different story. The arithmetic works.
Yeah. So let's talk about what leverage the Greens do have. Like, let's assume the mass stays the same. Arguably there's the arithmetic and the chemistry then stay with the NDP. Yeah.
Well, I do think they have less leverage this time, just because I think it just seems implausible that they could back a Conservative option. And I'm sure they're going to wait to see what happens with the final count anyways, because it depends on who's got 46. I mean, I suppose there's a chance someone's going to get 47 and this is all a moot point, but...
Well, what do you mean wait to approach somebody? Because I feel like they've got to be...
Oh, I'm sure they're talking, but no one's going to make any decisions until they know where they stand.
Sure. Oh, yeah, totally.
But we didn't start talking until after Comox last time, like in earnest. So, the Greens have a lot of influence here, but, someone texted me during election night the analogy of Joe Manchin in the U.S. Senate, the Democrat who often sided with the Republicans and was a key vote. And it's like, are there any Joe Manchins here? Is there anybody in the NDP caucus or maybe the Conservative caucus who kind of goes against party leadership and says, well, I'm not necessarily going to follow you on this if I don't like it?
Well, it's interesting if you add this ingredient of John Rostad saying he doesn't want to whip the vote, then maybe. And you've got a couple of interesting characters. I'll name first of all the BC United folks who maybe will be more likely to take a moderate position. Yeah. And then the former NDP candidate, did she end up Gwen O'Mahony? She lost. Okay, never mind. Yeah. But yeah. I mean, potentially, yes. I think that's the interesting thing. If you try and think about, I would say for the NDP, it's how do we find a viable path for 2 years? And I think it's as plausible that you could find something in a deal with the Greens or bumping along and picking out the key activities you could do with doing stuff that would be hard for the entire Conservative caucus to vote against.
But just in terms of the caucus dynamic, I'm interested in what Geoff has to say about it is, it's kind of assumed that the 45 or so will just follow the leadership. And then all the attention gets put on the two Greens, right? And it's fair to expect people in the larger caucus, in the 45, who are deeper down in the caucus, to say, what about me? Because they have they're one vote in the legislature, just like the Greens are each one vote in the legislature. So we don't have a history of that here, of acting up in caucus. Not much history where those power centers are publicly seen to be happening in the caucus and leveraging their own leadership. We don't see that, but they could if they wanted to.
Well, I think, and we saw federally, and it came up on some discussion I heard recently, but where a group that was frustrated with Stockwell Day broke away and created a new conservative faction of MPs. And there's incentives to do that in our legislative rules because, as Bruce Bamman discovered, or they knew, when the two, Rustad and Bamman, teamed up together, they got party status and money came in. They could hire some people or do whatever they wanted with that. And so I agree with Mike. That could be an issue. I think more so on the conservative side if they lose than on the NDP side in the short haul. If you look at 2017, you had a very experienced front bench there who'd been through the opposition wars and were extremely focused on closing the deal. And there was tremendous self-discipline within that group, so that it was quite easy for John Horgan to remind people of the risks of straying away. And I think that will still be the case for David Eby, because at the moment, everybody's expectation is that they will be successful and ultimately form a government. But then the challenge for the Premier and his team is to construct a cabinet within a very confined set of circumstances, a smaller group, but fewer people with experience, and a need to sort of show some respect to parts of the province where representation is quite weak, is going to be a challenge for him. It's a good challenge to have, as opposed to not forming a cabinet. So I think once the numbers are in, there'll be some very deep thinking and a lot of discussions, even across party lines.
Like traditionally in the NDP, at least my perception from the outside, Geoff, is that you had kind of your private sector union guys, IWA, forest base, maybe mining workers, steel workers, who were a strong voice in the caucus, and then maybe more urban, socially progressive side to it, environmental side to it. I don't see that in today's NDP caucus, that there's a big kind of jobs group, if we put it that way, that's resource-based, private sector union, like in this caucus. Because when I do that Joe Manchin reference, I think, well, that's maybe where that would come from. Like today's Dan Miller would stand up and say, "You're not going to give away our jobs to the Greens."
Yeah, but this is a really important discussion.
Group.
Yeah, but also it's a different British Columbia. I mean, you have Brenda Bailey there, who's widely respected in the tech sector. She and I would say Ravi Kahlon are the real tribunes of the economy and jobs. They're not necessarily from a labor background. If you want a labor person, Jennifer Whiteside is the last remaining very high profile former labor leader. So that's a bit of a shift. But I think in terms of that there's not an agreement really across party lines about what the economy of BC is about. And, we see John Rustad talking about forestry. It's a significantly smaller thing than it should be, in my view, but it's never going to be what it was. I went by the former IWA headquarters on Pender the other day, a 7 or 8 story building, architect designed by Arthur Erickson. Like, that was a time when the forest sector was massive in the economy. That's not the case now. And some of the new jobs that are arriving are from foreign tech companies like Amazon, fulfillment centers, and things like that, and the film industry. So the economy is shifting a lot. There's some strong economic voices there. But I think on the other side, the question that has to be asked internally, and you're pointing out to some extent, Mike, is, well, what about working people who appear to have voted in large numbers in places like Surrey and so on for the Conservatives? What are they thinking and feeling, and what's the way to make the appeal to them? Because they're the traditional base. It's been a long time since, this was always the jibe that was thrown at New Democrats, with some justice, which was that the labor leadership did not deliver the vote as if they were massed battalions of automatons. Workers are people. They have their own views. They often voted very much like the rest of the population. But the participation of the trade union movement in the NDP, which is distinctive, really brought a different flavor and character to how the NDP approached politics. And the changes in campaign finance reform are going to have already altered that. And I think already, and also had undoubtedly had an impact on the Conservative side, because there was a period of time there where it was clear that the BC Liberals had nothing to replace large denomination fundraising with. They didn't have that small donation base. I think the Conservatives have that more so. And that's part of the reason they were able to come through in spite of not having as much money as the BC United had.
We talk about what the business community is going to do because I want to say, like, at a high level, this is probably the worst outcome for them, not in the sense of like NDP versus conservative, but that like there's uncertainty. And definitely, for kind of approvals and investment and everything else, you need above all certainty. And I was reflecting a bit on like what happened to the Trudeau government. I'm going to say the worm turned 2021, I guess, like where they really started like working the media and becoming kind of the official opposition to the Liberals federally. In BC, could we have something similar where the business community gets like really upset and really tired with the kind of freeze that this uncertainty creates and sort of starts really pushing? Because they haven't been yet, right? They haven't been an
Oh, no,
overt.
I disagree. I
Tell me
think
more. Tell me more.
well, the business community has been furious for a long time.
But have they
The,
been active opposition? Like,
well,
have they? Yeah.
not in the way that I remember historically, but the participation of I would say there's certain things that are true about the business community that were not true, say, 20 years ago. One is that the business community generally understands we need reconciliation with First Nations. They differ about how that should look, provided there's respect for private property and fee simple property, that kind of stuff. That wasn't necessarily true 20 years ago, but they're not happy with the way this has been unfolding, particularly the Land Act changes. A second issue for the business community is the resource sector and the difficulties there. So it would have been an earthquake 20 years ago. I'm sure Mike would agree if Canfor had closed that many mills right before the election. It was an earthquake this time in those communities and a significant contributor, I'm sure, to Restad's success. The third area is that although the business community is very understanding that there is climate change and we need to have measures to take care of it, they're frustrated by the regulatory, I would say, as more than the taxation implications of that, and worried about what is coming next. So you see this battle in Vancouver about whether or not new homes should have gas in them or not. Whether they should have an option to take natural gas. All of these regulations are really irritating to the business community. We can argue whether they're right or wrong. The current situation is a nightmare for the business community because they were hoping, for the most part, I think, that a lot of these frustrations would be ended by Rustad and that they would be able to clean up whatever issues there were with potentially racist candidates or whatever, but that they would be finished with what they have seen as a very intrusive and controlling government. But they're not. Not only are they not in that position, they see the Green Party, which is they see as the source of all kinds of bad ideas, sitting with a apparent balance of power. So I think there's a lot of anxiety and nail biting in business communities, but worse than that, and this may sound surprising coming from me, they will not invest, and that was already happening to some extent because of other economic conditions, but the uncertainty is more than just having the jitters. They just stop, and a lot of people on the left don't realize how real a factor that is. So, we got a big laugh during the campaign about the Chip Wilson signs, but there's a whole lot of people who agree with Chip Wilson who just don't bother putting a sign on the front lawn, and that's going to be an issue.
Well, it's especially an issue right now because of the fiscal situation, heading into a massive deficit. The economy is uncertain. I think if Premier Eby does move on to govern here in the weeks ahead, I think they got to think very carefully about the message they're sending the business community and investors about what British Columbia is like as a place to invest. There's a lot of big questions. It's taxation, it's DRIPA, it's a whole bunch of things that create complexity and uncertainty. And when you compare BC to Alberta or the rest of Canada or other jurisdictions in the world, it gives investors pause for thought. Mm-hmm. And I think with the electorate, I think generally has a favorable view on economic development. Like they generally want projects to go ahead. They generally want to see continued growth because they understand the connection between that and the services they receive in a big picture kind of way. So I think the government's got to be careful not to be seen to be losing those opportunities that support the economy. And that's going to be a very delicate balance for them with the Greens. Who knows how the Greens are going to play? We know what the Greens say when it comes to natural gas and LNG and that stuff. It's pretty clear. They're probably not as bent out of shape about mining, because critical minerals and things like that. You might see the NDP and Greens really lean into the mining sector. But one way or another, though, if the narrative coming out of this election is uncertainty and it's getting worse, then that's going to start feeling like the latter part of the 1990s when the NDP government of the day just couldn't get off the back foot, and it kept getting worse and worse and worse politically.
You see, there were apparently 23 developers lined up at a public hearing at Metro Vancouver this week, complaining about the Metro Board's decision to put an increase in their development cost levies, which are the charges put on development in order to pay for all of lots of services. Now, developers hate to pay that. They say they pass it along to homeowners who then it makes it more unaffordable and so forth. And again, another long debate. But if that money is not forthcoming from those charges, it'll have to come from somewhere else, which is property tax. And in every area you look, you see the business community saying, reduce our costs, make it easier for us to generate affordability. And the solution is generally taxing somebody else, which is very, very difficult for local politicians. And a lot of those discussions haven't happened yet, and I think are pretty problematic. The housing goals that were so critical to this election, apparently, but we're not debated that much. We saw Rustad saying, I'm going to tear up EB's whole plan. And there's another whole plan that EB announced that hasn't been implemented yet, which would use public land and so on. In other words, we'll go back to where we were. Is that going to have political negative consequences for a Rustad administration? I'm not sure. So the business side of this, a third of the economy is real estate. Due to interest rates, not a lot of construction is happening. And I would argue that that's the case, notwithstanding whatever complaints you may hear about red tape and all that kind of thing. So how are we going to get this housing supply if it's not considered profitable for the developers, and they're making larger and larger demands on the public finances, I would say, not just regulations, to make it affordable? It's a big, big problem.
Let's stay with finances for a minute, because whatever happens, if there's an agreement or they go vote to vote, whoever forms government, we're really close to a budget, right? Like really
big time,
yeah. So, and I'm gonna say, this could be a situation, let's say, let's accept the Greens have less leverage than they do now, but I'm gonna I'm thinking about a budget, and getting moving on that quickly, and thinking that is easier to pull off in cooperation with the Greens for the NDP than probably would be in cooperation with the Conservatives. It's easier to offer something to those two MLAs to bring them on board to vote it than to negotiate with all of these separate 45 right now BC Conservative MLAs. And the fact that I think no matter what you're going to do, despite the fact that they committed to actually have the deficit go up in their own platform.
Are you suggesting the Langley Hospital Tower might move to Squamish?
That's exactly what I'm suggesting.
I'm not sure it's going to happen in Langley.
I heard Lions Bay, but I can't.
Lions Bay Tower.
Don't quote me.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah.
And by the way, Queensboro, see you later,
Totally. This is the thing, how you get through a budget does feel like that's the opportunity. Let's say they don't, let's say they go vote to vote. That feels like the play for the Greens, where because if you're going to survive that, I don't see the NDP doing it with the Conservatives. And maybe I'll just put it as an open-ended question to both of you, how the heck do you survive that? That feels like that someone's going to be starting on that right away, and that's going to be a big lift.
Well, it's a game of chicken on the budget, and do they really think the Greens are going to vote them out of power in February? I'm sure there'll be a little...
The Greens aren't, but the Conservatives would. John Ross.
I know, but if the NDP just need the 2 Green votes, are they really going to vote them out of power?
No. Fair. Yeah. So, it's still leverage, though.
At that point?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. They're going to have to do a little bit. famously,
Not
on
in the Victoria.
on my 11th birthday, Joe Clark lost the budget vote in the House of Commons, and because
Is
he
this
didn't
seriously
think.
what you were watching on your 11th birthday? Is that why you
No,
remember? Okay,
no.
okay. It's
Well,
just
I
like
might have. I don't know. I was
it
keen,
feels
but
plausible.
Joe Clark didn't think the opposition would vote him down, and there were six Creditiste members from Quebec who voted against the budget, and they never thought the Creditiste would do that, and the Creditiste all lost their seats too in the subsequent election. But it's, you can't be too complacent about it. Like, you have to know that the votes are going to be there.
Mhm.
But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's like, well, it's going to be pretty egregious for the Greens to cause an election
Yeah,
on the first budget.
on the
They
first.
Well, I
don't even
think
have they
you
don't
have
even
to
have a leader yet.
structure it so that there's something in there that a Green supporting voter would agree is a nice to have.
Yeah.
And there would be people scratching their head or groaning if they didn't get it.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure what that is. These two guys will have to sit down and figure that out with whoever the senior team is there. But an EB administration would have to sit down and say, okay, what is significant and visible that would be seen as a win by the Greens that we put in, that people would be critical of them for torpedoing, especially if it led to an election. But I don't think that takes away from Mike's larger point, which is this was going to be a miserable budget to generate under any circumstances.
Yeah.
And it's not easier in this context. Same for the statement that the premier made on Saturday night about crime and safety. I know I'm a broken record on this thing, but fighting crime or helping with addiction and so forth is not cheap. It can't be done by a regulatory move or a simple reorganization or something. There is no simple reorganization. So finding the way to give the public some confidence that you've heard them on this issue and understanding exactly what they're looking to improve is tricky. And then financing it is even trickier. So hard.
Yeah.
Not impossible, hard.
Yeah. But and just a quick note to say, like, neither of these Greens are gentlemen who won their riding by huge margins. They're going to be looking, I think, to generate some good proof points. And I'm going to swallow the next question I want to ask because we're running out of time, and we'll save it for the next episode. But like, it makes me want to talk about like cabinet and like both parties, like who are the folks, like who are you going to put in finance on this? Because that's going to be real pinch hitter. But this is me swallowing the question. This is me like foreshadowing next week's episode because we got to go to the mini bar.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the mini bar.
I'm going to raise a glass to, this will seem like, maybe back padding a bit, but I do want to raise a glass to Jas Johal for this reason. I thought he played a unique and important role in the election through not just his show, which is always interesting, but by his release of, material that he received, particularly the opposition research that was done by BC United that found its way to him. And he made the decision to post it all and let people make their own judgments about it rather than sort of dribble it out over a period of time. And he was good on Twitter, not just on the radio, kind of giving what I thought was really interesting insider stuff. So I was just, we've done a lot of work with Jas, so this may seem self-serving, but I honestly do want to thank him and praise him for that role because it was an important role that he played both in social media and through his show throughout. He had that background being an elected MLA, and he's got a vast history in journalism. So he put both to great use. So thanks, Jas.
You're here. Mike?
I'm going to take a shot at myself.
A mea culpa?
So, I put out my little list of 5 ridings that these will go with whoever's government. And in a way, it went 3-2. So I guess in a way I was right.
Maybe that's right.
But some of my ridings that I thought would be too close to calling election day were just smoke shows, like North Van Seymour.
Yeah.
Wasn't
no
close.
one saw that coming.
North Nanaimo Lanceville wasn't really that close. So long and the short of it, I guess I could raise my glass to the people and the voters who it's good that they surprise the pundits and the prognosticators because it's the voters that are in charge at the end of the day. And it's good that we don't always know exactly what's going to happen on elections. The voters get to choose. It's none of our, we don't get to manipulate it. So anyways, I missed a few calls, so I'm feeling quite chastened and humbled
Humble.
The
Okay.
H word.
But yes, which is only applies when used overtly. All
Yes.
right. All right. I'm going to raise my glass too. We are a cheery bunch, and I'm going to raise my glass to the BC Conservatives and the 40% women elected. I think that's a huge leap. I do think that's a precedent in Canada for a Conservative Party, and I think that is great. It is. I will give them the rounding. Well, it's not quite a rounding error, but it's close enough to 50 that I'll take it. And I'll just encourage an inception. If they form government, I think having at least 40% women in your cabinet would be a good next move. And I encourage, I mean, if this comes to play for them, I encourage them to make a commitment to that. And that's a wrap, gentlemen. That is another regular Blythe weekly episode of Hotel Pacifico.
The new era begins next week. We'll know exactly what happened.
Yeah,
exactly.
I feel like I've got like a little advent calendar counting me down to Saturday. All right. Thank you both, gentlemen. Thank you, TELUS and Fortis BC and Airbnb. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.